So if you guys recognize that, that was actually the intro to 350 by Veil of Maya, which is an incredibly talented band, definitely one of my favorites. I figured that it would be a good song to use for the modern metalcore demo because that's kind of pretty much what modern metalcore is nowadays. So without any further ado, let's dive into the drums. So for the drums here, I have a not really, I wouldn't call it a professional because I'm by no means a professional mixer, but I have this drum track here, which is Easy Drummer 2. I use this on all my drums. This is what it sounds like when it's isolated. So pretty tight, clicky drums, pretty much the staple tone of drums in modern metalcore music. So dive into the plugins here. I have a ton of processing on my drums, and I have my drum bus here. We can start with the kicks. So I have lots of different compression and EQ and stuff on my kicks, and I'll go into detail of all of these here. Alright, so this is what the kick sounds like, just the dry sample straight out of Easy Drummer. Sounds really flat and just dry. So we put this plugin on. It's called Molot, or I don't know how you pronounce this. It's from a Russian guy, but it sounds really good when you tweak it to these settings here. You can hear it adds more click to it. It's kind of subtle right now because I don't have any other plugins going, but whenever I have the rest of the plugins on, the difference is really big. So next up, I got this compressor here. This is a stock compressor from Cubase. Once again, the difference is pretty subtle, but in the big picture, it makes a bigger difference. And next up, I got this EQ here. So it brings out a lot of the frequencies that kind of make the kick drum pop. And these two in the middle here are like frequencies that I didn't really like, so I should kind of just drop them out, which is what I do with a lot of EQ in this song, and just in general. Like I said, pretty subtle, but this all really adds up to the big picture. And I have another EQ here for the kicks. This one's really important because of this EQ curve here brings out a lot of the presence of the kick. If I turn this exact curve off, you'll hear the difference. So yeah, major change. I really recommend bringing up a lot of the higher frequencies in your kick if you want it to sound more clickier. Next up, I got this envelope shaper here. Once again, another subtle difference, but pretty much it just adds more effect to the reverb whenever I have this reverb plugin on. I have my limiter here. Kind of just keeps all the hits to sound pretty balanced and identical to each other. And then I had this maximizer. These, by the way, are all stock Cubase plugins except for Molot, which is actually a free plugin that you can download. I have this preset called Drum Bus Enhancer on, which, you know, I think you can pretty much hear the difference that it makes. Just brings out a lot more volume while preserving the dynamics of the kick drum. And then I have this plugin here called CLA Drums, which is from Waves. It costs like $50. So as you can hear, it brings some more reverb out and brings more dynamics out and more click to the kick drum. So moving on from that, we're going to go to the snare here. So it's a pretty how do I say this? Pretty huge sounding snare drum. I have Molot here again. Here's the dry sound from Easy Drummer. Sounds really shitty, but then put on Molot. Already got a good starting place for the rest of the processing on the snare drum. I have this envelope shaper here. Brings out more of the attack of the snare drum right here with the initial hit. And I think I have a very small change right here to add a little bit more of the reverb and trailing off effect. And then I have this EQ here. Brings out some more presence while getting rid of whistling frequencies. Tube compressor. Just makes it easier to listen to and doesn't sound like a vacuum every time it's being hit. Where the sound kind of just like gets sucked out, if that makes sense. This is just VST Dynamics. I don't really know exactly what this is. I think it's multiple plugins into one. It's just stock Cubase plugin. This cleans up the hit because there's way too much reverb going on at the end. Another EQ here. Takes out some of the lows, takes out more whistling frequencies. And the maximizer here. Just makes it louder while preserving the dynamics. And then CLA drums once again. Just makes the snare sound a lot more huge. And onto the hi-hats. We have 3 plugins, not too much going on here. Here's the dry signal. Once I can figure out how to do this. Here's the dry signal. So it's really quiet. And then I put Mola on here. I don't know if you can really hear that, but subtle change. Then I have this EQ here. Brings more presence out. And then this EQ right here. More presence, and these 2 whistling frequencies I just drained out because they were pretty annoying to listen to. And that's it for my hi-hats. My toms, I have one plugin, which is this CLA drums one. Holy shit, I have like everything going right now. So yeah, it just makes the tom sound a lot more huge and more processed, which is what we want to go for with this genre of music. But I'm not going to waste time on this because it's pretty simple. Here's the ambient or the overheads. First off, I have this envelope shaper to bring more presence out with the trailing off of the sound and then more attack onto the initial hit. I have CLA drums once again with the overhead preset. I have a compressor. And then this EQ here to bring out more presence of each of the hits. Next up, got ambience. I only have one plugin here. I have the room preset on with the Ciela drums. Brings out a lot more of the dynamics of the ambience. And then finally, I have this reverb here. Just simple EQ curves, 2 EQ curves to bring out some more of the frequencies and dynamics. So then finally I have this drum bus track here where I have all these tracks here routed into this final one where I do some processing. Let me just bypass all of these. So first off here I have the studio EQ. Brings out some more of the dynamics while getting rid of frequencies that don't really belong in the drum mix. I don't know, I just mixed it by ear, so I just shaped it to the way that I thought sounded the best. I have this maximizer here, which basically just makes it sound louder using the drum bus enhancer preset again. And then I have a compressor here which just compresses the sound of it because I didn't want it to be too loud and overpowering in the mix. Here just does its job, does what it says it is. It's a compressor. Alright, so next we're going to move on to the guitars. Alright, so this is what the guitars sound like just by themselves with the processing on them. Okay, so pretty high gain. Pretty much any metalcore song, even older metalcore, is high gain. So to achieve that, I used bias effects, EQ, and this compressors here. And the bias effects amp that I used was created by somebody else that I downloaded off of ToneCloud. But I'm gonna show you it here. So it's a dual rectifier. It's called duality rectifier. It's supposed to be like a dual rectifier amp sim because it has these two 92 tread plates, which you can see it looks like the dual rectifier. I have the noise gate here pretty tight because I don't want too much feedback. This drive pedal here to keep the tone more focused and centered and just more. I'll just play it so you can hear what it sounds like without it on. So this is with no drive pedal. So it just makes a huge difference. This is a Tube Screamer emulator kind of. It's not a metalcore song if you don't have a Tube Screamer. Then I have these two amps here. They have the same settings here: high gain, high bass, low mids, high treble, high presence, and a little bit of an increase on the volume. Next up for my cabs, I'm using a British G12V and then orange V30s, which is like an orange head, a cabinet. And I'm using C414 mics. Originally, I think this had the rectifier cab, but I didn't really like how that sounded, so I put these two on, and it sounded a lot better. So this is what the guitar tone sounds like with absolutely nothing, just straight DI. So it sounds really like a country song. But anyway, we're going to go to this EQ here. So pretty typical EQ shape for guitars. Only thing is right here, I just did this because I wanted more presence in the guitars, if that makes sense. I like how it added more presence. Hold on, let me just solo this guitar here. This is what the EQ sounds like with it on. This is with it off. So it's way too boomy. There's no room for the bass guitar, so that's why I had to make this curve here. And these are just two frequencies that didn't belong in the guitars. Next up, I got this tube compressor here, which just compresses it. I have the electric guitar dirty 2 preset on from Cubase. Just brings out a lot more volume and character into the guitars. And yeah, that's pretty much it, honestly. Most of the tone, when it comes to me mixing guitars and just recording in general, comes from the actual player, which is actually a pretty well argued statement, because you can have all this processing on your guitars and it could still sound bad if the person was playing it badly. So that's why you have to have a really good source player. But anyway, without too much boasting on my guitars, we have the bass guitars. Bass to me is pretty important for metal music, especially modern metalcore, because it sounds empty without a good bass tone. So this is what the bass tone sounds like when it's processed. Just soloed out. So it's not like my gent bass tutorial where it's like super saturated and just disgusting. It's kind of more just like a growl, more contained tone. But it does its job. It holds down the low end. You can kind of hear it over the guitars a little bit, but not too much to the point where it's like a third guitar playing. So without further ado, I have this bass source track, which is my DI almost. I just have this Sans amp emulator on it to kind of make it stereo. Here it's only coming out the right side, so when I turn this on, it's like a preamp, I would say. So like, just imagine I was recording through, then my bass goes in here and then out into the DI box is kind of like how I imagine this. Just a little bit more of like a focus and like a good bass to build off of when I'm recording my bass. No pun intended. So let's start with the grit. Actually, yeah, let's start with the grit. So the grit is a channel that I wanted to have a bit of growl to. So in order to do that, I used this Emissary plugin, which is originally a guitar plugin from Ignite Amps. It's free, but I used it to get a distortion tone out of. So this is what it sounds like with it on. Notice I'm on the red channel, which is this lead channel right here. This is the clean channel. This is what it sounds like on the clean channel. So it's pretty trash, but put it on the lead channel. Have a good amount of drive on it. Not too much to the point where it's like ear rape, but you know. Next up, we got Tone Forge Guilty Pleasure. This is a plugin by Joey Sturgis, the man himself, the master of metalcore mixing. This is just another one to add a cab and then just more focus to the distortion. You can see here I have this orange custom cab on, 4x12, using the 421 mic on it. You can select different mics, but I like this one the best, but I'll just show what it sounds like with different mics. And then they also have a Mesa cab, which is more for the guitars, because this is a guitar plugin, but I just used it on bass because why not be creative. So this is what this Mesa plugin, this cab sounds like. But yeah, so next up after that we got a compressor here. Pretty subtle difference there, as you can see my settings. And then this EQ here to scoop out a lot of the low end, because I wanted to leave this area here of the bass tone to my subtrack where I could build more of the actual bass sound. You can hear it takes out a lot of the low end boominess of the bass. So after that, we're gonna move on to my bass subtrack. So here I'm using 4 plugins. I have this SHB one by Ignite Amps. This is a free plugin. This is what it sounds like with just the SHB on. This is with it off. So it just kind of cleans it up and tames the bass so that every note sounds consistent, and then just gives a more focused boost to the actual bass of it, because we're trying to build a subtrack here. So after that, I have this EQ, which just boosts the low end and cuts out all the high, because we're leaving this to the grit part, which I already went over. So this is what it sounds like with it on and without. So focus is more on the low end. And I got this compressor here. A lot more compression on this low end, because that's what we want it to sound like. We want a consistent and low subtrack, because that is the job of the bass. That does more work on making sure every note is pretty consistent with each other. And after that, I have all these tracks here routed to my master bus, which is on the far right side of the screen, the stereo out. Let me just make sure all these tracks are on. And let me bypass all these effects on my master track. This is with the processing on. So first off, I have this EQ here on my master. Boosts the low end because I wanted more bass presence in the track. 2 whistling frequencies that took out so that the song was easier listening to. I don't know, this just, here's what they sound like when I amplify them. As you can see, that's obnoxious and ear rape, so I didn't want that in the song. I have this EQ curve here. More presence here in the higher frequencies from like 5K to 20K, and another whistling frequency. And I don't know what the fuck this does, honestly. I don't know why it's in here, but yeah. Anyway, that's the song. Pretty much a basic tutorial on modern metalcore mixing. Basically, the point of this video was if you could find any tips on. Alright, so that's the end of the song. This was just a video on if you guys could get any tips out of this, because I am by no means a professional. I'm just a musician here who's just learning how to record and stuff and just spraying the knowledge. But this is what the song sounds like with absolutely no plugins. Just turn all these off. This is what it sounds like with no plugins or processing at all. enjoyed.